Hello. We have with us Taimur. He's a leading member and an activist from the US, from Socialist Alternative. It's the US section of the CWI, the Committee for Workers International, in which Ξεκίνημα is the Greek section. So we'd like to pose you some questions on the crisis and the Occupy movement of the US. And, to begin with, it's obvious that capitalism is in a worldwide crisis. So what are the effects in the working class in the US at this period?
Well, yeah, I mean, the US working class it's not as bad as the situation in Greece, but it's quite bad that we now have over 50 million people in the US living in poverty. We have unemployment for young people, upwards of 20% by official statistics, and in reality it's much higher than that. For African Americans it's even higher. 1 in 4 children now are malnourished in the United States, living below the poverty line. And given the crisis, the situation with the political situation is in crisis as well. The right-wing politicians around the Tea Party and the Republicans are whipping up racism, bigotry against women. So we see the more attacks on the right to abortion and on women's rights than ever before last year, with states all across the country passing laws restricting the right of women to birth control, to abortion, with anti-immigrant laws preventing immigrants from accessing health care or schools or even their basic rights. So it's quite a devastating crisis that's producing a lot of anger and frustration throughout the US working class and young people.
Okay. And the previous months there was a big movement, the Occupy movement, Occupy Wall Street movement in America. What did this movement represent for the US society, and which layers of the US society participated in the movement, the youth, the working class?
I mean, well, I'd begin by saying that without the magnificent movement of the Greek working class and the Greek young people, as well as Spain, and of course Egypt and Tunisia and all around the world, I don't think the Occupy movement in the US would have happened. It truly was part of an international movement. From the very first, the organizers of Occupy Wall Street said, you know, let's do what they've done in Spain, let's do what they've done in Greece, let's do what they did in Tahrir Square. So it was inspired by the international events. I mean, at first, we should say it was mainly the young people that came out into the streets. And, you know, at first maybe more of a middle-class layer of society. But the slogans they put forward of we are the 99%, we're against the 1%, the idea of targeting Wall Street, the center of US capitalism, of global capitalism, that got an echo amongst wide layers of the US working class. Very quickly they had majority support. Very quickly the corporate media could not ignore them, and occupations began all across the country. More than 1,000 US cities were impacted in occupations or demonstrations in solidarity. So very quickly it drew in sections of the trade unions, many working class youth, and while most people didn't actually go to camp out, you know, it stirred up discussions around the dinner table and the workplace and the schools, etc. So it was a very broad movement that had a major impact on the psychology and the class consciousness of US society. We see now that, you know, more young people support socialism in the US, 49%, than support capitalism, only 46%. You know, they don't know fully what socialism means, it's a word, but it shows the growth of socialists and a class consciousness.
How many people would you say that participated in the movement, and at the peak, I mean, at the biggest demonstrations, how many people did they take part in these demonstrations?
Well, there's a contradiction here, because at the height, really, the biggest demonstrations were only 40,000 in New York and again in Oakland around the shutdown of the West Coast ports, which is not big. By US standards even, you know, there's not uncommon with the labor movement to organize 50,000, 100,000. That happens, so, you know, the anti-war movement was bigger. But from the point of view of the impact on the consciousness, the amount of discussion it provoked in society about corporate control, about the lack of democracy, about inequality, it had a much larger impact than even bigger demonstrations and bigger protests have had in the past. I think the idea of going out every single day, of occupying the squares, well, it's hard for everybody to participate in that, but the determination showed by the young people who did captured the spirit of what many were feeling, even if they didn't actively participate.
Okay, one of the slogans of the movement was that we are 99% and they are 1%. And in which way would you say that the banks and the big capitalists would be forced to pay for this crisis, and what are the proposition and the main program of the socialist alternative at this kind of period against the crisis?
We had an excellent, Socialist Alternative had an excellent intervention, and we got a very good response for ideas. On our leaflets and the speeches that we gave, we proposed, the first proposal was that the banks should be nationalized. They should be put under democratic community control of the workers and the wider community, and that the resources that they have, stolen from much of the world should be democratically allocated, investing in saving people's homes. The 2 million people who've been forced out of their homes in foreclosure, well, they should be the first to receive help, to solve poverty, to invest in more jobs, in green jobs, to save the environment. So we also think that, that unless working people in general, it's not just the banks, but unless we have democratic control over every business, all the corporations, that they will continue to wreak havoc. So, unfortunately, both political parties in the U.S. are controlled by big business, and working people have no political voice. So our proposal is that the Occupy movement, along with the trade unions, the other social movement organizations, should unite to run independent candidates as a step toward building a party that represents working people. We say a party that represents the millions, not the millionaires. Wall Street has two parties. Ordinary people need one of our own.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.